Governor Lowe has been sacked from Australia's top economic position. In this video, I'm going to go through why it's a complete crock that we've got rid of the best person for the job at the time we need him the most. It is ridiculous that this decision has been made, completely unfair, and reflects a lack of courage from the Australian government to do what is necessary and right for the Australian people. Ultimately, we need a fall guy for the inflation problem. Instead of looking at themselves, they've chosen to blame this person. We've done it because people are angry, people are frustrated, and people are ignorant. They're not seeking to understand why decisions are made. They're just seeking to blame someone for it. The truth is, when you don't understand something as complex as central bank monetary policy decision-making.
Who does at the end of the day? It's like really, really complicated.
No one really gets it. When you don't understand something and it doesn't quite go your way, you just want to blame someone. And that's what we're doing here. Real estate agents, auctioneers, journalists, you read the papers, whoever you speak to, people that don't get it, they quickly judge and they just say, here's an idiot, we've got to get rid of him, blame him, it's all his fault. That's essentially the media line, and the Australian government have done what's easy, protected their votes, really, and that's their currency, so I understand that, and got rid of him and made him the fall guy for inflation rather than looking at themselves for what they could do to actually help solve the problem. So in this video, we're going to go through his legacy. Let's go through it. He's being judged on these very words.
At that time, the board recognised that the pandemic would require an extended period of very accommodative monetary policy. Reflecting this, the board's view was that the probability was extremely low that the conditions for an increase in the cash rate would be met within 3 years, and adopting a 3-year yield target reinforced that message.
Does that sound like a promise that interest rates won't ever rise? Sure, he's made a forecast based during a lockdown period where all of our businesses in the two major capitals were locked down and economic activity was cratering, that hey, unemployment will go up. No surprise there. That's pretty much common sense. Everyone thought that in March, May, April 2020. And then fast forward a year, we had a giant lockdown, one of the world's longest lockdowns in New South Wales and Victoria. Of course, economic activity is going to go down. And of course, the central bank needs to do what they have to help promote the economy. Now, this is where context is key. And this is where seeking to understand will actually provide some clarity. No one's interested in this, but it's the truth. Let's go back in time and see what he actually did. So in March, April, May 2020, he introduced what's called the yield control. So what the central bank does typically when they move up and down interest rates, they hit variable rates, the overnight cash rate that banks lend to each other, and that ultimately impacts variable rate mortgages all across the country. Now, this was already anchored to zero, so they couldn't bring it down any further. So what they did instead was target the next side of the short end of the yield curve, the 2 to 3 year bonds. They targeted the price of 2 to 3 year bonds to drive down interest rates over a 2 to 3 year period. The logic here was COVID's going to be around for a while. It's going to impact the Australian economy for a while. Let's bring interest rates down for an extended period of time and drum them as low as we can to help promote the economy. Now, when you don't have other choices because the variable rate's already zero, this makes a lot of sense. Let's go through their own review of the yield curve control policy. On 19 March 2020, the Reserve Bank introduced a target for the yield 3-year government bonds of around 0.25%. So this is the 3-year government bond instead of the overnight cash rate that I've just talked about. So what did this do? And why did they have to explain that interest rates need to be low for a few years? Why did they provide forward guidance all the way to 2024? Well, when you start buying government bonds for 2 to 3 years, well, the obvious explainer there is, hey, we think interest rates are going to be low for a couple of years' time. That's why we're buying these bonds. It's all we can really do, so we're going to do it to help promote the Australian economy. Now, let's look at why. Makes a lot of sense. This is the forecast position of where the Australian economy would be as at May 2020. So rewind the clock, go back 3 years and start forecasting what the Australian economy is going to look like. Look, everyone got this wildly wrong. Wherever you go, everywhere in the world, we got this so far off. At the time, we're watching, YouTube videos, media of countries all around the world where they're making hospitals in Central Park. what is an economist supposed to do when they're predicting what's going to happen to the economy? Every business is shut. You got no idea what's going on. It hasn't happened for 100 years. There's no history. There's no template for, hey, how are we going to recover from this? There's no vaccine. We have absolutely no idea. And they've made these forecasts. So the forecast position just before the COVID crisis was, hey, look, between 2020 to 2022, we'd grow a few percentage points a year, trend growth would keep going up. But then COVID hit and we completely change our forecast and instead predict this is the baseline scenario and the upside scenario. If things go well, if things go really, really well, the upside scenario, the best case scenario of how it could look is we'd have a monumental recession and it would take effectively 2 years to get back into the normal position. The impact on unemployment in the upside scenario would be that unemployment would go up to 10% and then, come back down to roughly 4% in 2 to 3 years' time. So in each of these scenarios, the central bank has one thing to do whatever it can to help promote the economy. And that's what they did with the yield curve control. So this policy was buying bonds over 2 to 3 years and as a result, providing communication to the public that, hey, look, we expect interest rates to be low for a couple of years. That's why we're buying these bonds and anchoring medium-term interest rates down. This meant fixed rate mortgages, along with the term funding facility, which gave banks, free money to lend out for a couple of years. These two sort of policy metrics that the central bank did helped bring forward demand and helped, speed up our economy at a time where it needed to. Now, obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of the vaccine kicking in within 6 months and, within 6 to 12 months and, the country doing much, much better, all the fiscal stimulus kicking in and effectively COVID not nearly being as bad as we thought it would be, monetary stimulus probably went too far, but fiscal stimulus went way too far. That's really what's caused our inflation problem. We pumped, billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars into the Australian economy and threw fire at it, which we needed to do at the time, but we didn't take it away quick enough. And that was largely fiscal policy because monetary policy was already near zero to begin with. So that's its starting point. And, we added a little bit more monetary gas, made sure that there was enough liquidity in the system, printed money. We did some things in monetary policy land, but really the bulk of the inflation problem has come from excessive fiscal stimulus at the time.
How do you rate his performance?
Oh, look, I've always said that he's the best economist I've seen in the public sector in my time. Whenever I read his speeches, I learn something. I think he had an incredibly difficult challenge. And the policy instruments that he used during COVID at the time were considered to be necessary and did play a role. Of course, the major reason why the economy avoided a recession during that period was government spending, the big fiscal stimulus.
So let's go through what happened with this yield curve control. So, by doing this policy, they brought the 2 to 3 yields down a lot very, very quickly. And then what happened to fixed rate mortgages is kind of what I want to show here. You'll see that fixed rate mortgages began coming down and people were able to borrow at low interest rates for a few years. People started taking this up because fixed rate mortgages made up nearly 50% of total mortgages. So this shows the share of fixed rate mortgages in new owner occupier lending from this policy, and TFF, went from, 10-15%, which would be the standard amount, all the way up to 45-50% of loans. So that is, half of Australian borrowers were out there taking on mortgages for 2 to 3 years saying, hey, look, interest rates will be low for this period of time. I'm going to take advantage of it. And that's what the central bank did to bring forward demand. And we needed bring forward of demand because we're in the middle of COVID crisis and we needed things to go up. And you see this in credit demand. It just shot up dramatically. And obviously house prices did too. That's what happens when you drive liquidity to the system, you drive interest rates really low and everything reopens, house prices do go up. So that did happen. But is it fair to sack him for making these decisions at that particular point in time with the information he had on hand? Really, he had no other choice. He couldn't sit there and being like,
look, I'm not going to promote the Australian economy because my forecast says that, COVID won't really be that bad. I know Treasury and every other economist are saying that, it's pretty bad out there and, you turn the TV on, it's really bad. But you know what? I'm going to do nothing about it. I'm not going to help because, let the Australian businesses have a go.
of course he's not going to do that. That makes no sense. The Australian government came up with a pretty clever policy, and their own analysis of the yield curve control was, hey, it worked pretty well. It was better than just targeting quantitative easing, which is longer term bonds, and that kind of suits longer term projects. Targeting the 2 to 3 year bond in Australia and driving those interest rates really low helped promote the economy and provide certainty at a time where we needed it. So this is his ultimate legacy. It is completely unfair, and it doesn't take into account the context in which he was making his decisions. And these decisions were right for the Australian people at the time. That's why it's completely unfair to make him the fall guy in Australia without seeking to understand why these decisions are made. At the time, they were the right decisions, and go at it again, whoever is in charge, Governor Lowe, Michelle Bullock, any central banker around the world, they'd be making the same decisions or very similar decisions that ultimately help bring forward of demand during a time where the Australian people needed it.